This particular part of the series, this second sermon, the title of this one is Competition. Competition. The second sermon is competition. Now, we have all kinds of competitions in life. Sporting competitions are those there are a lot of them biblically that are talked about. There are all kinds of different competitions that are in there. But a whole lot of sports. And it's always been analogous. It's always been something that we use. I was even having a discussion earlier today. It's kind of like if United States now, you have pastors from the pulpit. When football rolls around, you can throw out football analogies. You can throw out baseball analogies because everyone has, it's part of our culture, we kind of understand that. The Olympics rolls around and it's a worldwide event and has been for a very, very long time. So there's a lot of that. Biblically, there was tons of that going on. So I want to pull from that. In fact, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, a little bit more background about the Olympics, what the name, where it derives from. So the first event, 776 BC, that's been a few years. How many of y'all know it's been a little while? That's when the first fully recorded and known event in Olympus was. So the cities at the time in the Greek communities were named after their gods. They were patron gods of these different areas. And so Olympus, and there was a mountain in Olympus, and they would have an event there every 4 years that it rolled around. And in Olympus, the god was Zeus. So he was the patron god of Olympus. And so Olympus was really the big one. This is the one they really wanted to compete at, do well. It was a big deal. So 776 is the first recorded, for sure, event that they know. They had always been doing sporting events, but they had this big event there. And this was the first one, and then every 4 years, they roll back into Olympus. So what they called that, and that 4-year period became known as an Olympiad. An Olympiad actually became known as a 4-year period and became part of the vernacular. It is actually a Greek word, means a 4-year period. So those were Olympiads. So Olympiad is every 4 years, and they started doing them every 4 years until some 300 years after Christ, they were still having these events. It was kicked back in the late 1800s. It's something interesting if you go back from that very first Olympiad in 776, or the very first Olympics. If you do every 4 years, we are exactly this year 700 Olympiads later, 2,800 years. And that's a long time. That's a long time. Sporting events have been and were long before that, but they've continued on. They were going for quite some time by the time Jesus showed up, and they were very much part of the culture. So you have this long period of time. The very first event and the very first several events that were going on, the Olympics and the other events that were going on at that time, they would run what was called the stadia. And the stadia was a length of their arenas that they had. And there is a word that we still have to this day that comes from that. In fact, I've got the Greek word here in 3 parts. If you put that up, there is the stadion, that's the singular, the plural is stadia. The Greek, you can see the word there is stadion, Latinized to stadium. There's an Anglican word, stade or stade. Ancient Greek unit of length consisting of 600 feet. Greek feet, which sometimes we're not sure exactly what that distance may mean because not all the stadiums are the same length. It's kind of like American ballparks, baseball parks to this day. There's not a standardized ballpark size, and so the stadia were not all exactly the same length. And so anyway, this was a race that they had. It was about 150 to 210 meters in length, and so they would bring people from all these different Greek cities together, and they would have their patron god that they represented, and they would run these races, this stadia race. There would be a big warm-up to it, but the big thing was who's going to be the fastest. They started adding other Olympic events over time. There was one called pancration, which is basically MMA. It's like no holds barred, every man for himself, and And you're going to have this. They had actual wrestling matches. They had horses became a really big part of it because this was all a lot of times based on, they really wanted to emulate battle, and so they had their chariots and horses and races, and it grew over time. It lasted up until there was Theodosius the first, about 393. He made this declaration. And think and understand this, the Roman Empire, as the 3rd century rolled around, and then you have Constantine, you have a lot going on, Christianity, by the 393 of Theodosius is ruler, is the religion of the Roman Empire. We get what's the Holy Roman Empire comes from that. Roman Catholicism comes from that. And the Catholic Church is the church for 1,500 years. But Theodosius in 393 said, these are pagan events. They're based on foreign gods and everything else, and we shouldn't be doing that. It actually, historically, we find that it kind of still held on for a little bit, and it finally stopped when Olympus, the stadium there, burned down under Theodosius II. Historians say there are multiple reasons that it stopped. Obviously, one of the things that happened was it really lost all of its popularity because it was so ingrained in these false gods and these patron gods of the time and stuff, and it was very pagan in a lot of different ways. There was a lot that was going on with these games for a long period of time, and they just kind of lost favor. No one really wanted to go anymore. It reminds me of some of the great awakenings and times where there was a really big revival at different times in history, and whether in Europe or the United States, there have been huge revivals. And I remember stories of, even in the Great Awakening, all the bars shut down and prostitution ended, and people look back and say, well, did they make it illegal? Did they just shut them down? No, because all the bar owners and the prostitutes and the patrons and the people who would normally be part of that, they stopped going because they were convicted and became different, and the owners themselves said, I don't want to do this anymore, and all that just kind of dried up, and that's kind of what happened historically, it seems, with the Olympics during that time, because it had become such a pagan, well, it was a pagan event. One of the things that happened in the Olympics from the very beginning, if you read about it historically, is it was all done in the nude. The Greeks worshipped the human body. And so you could go back and historically find out that it was heavily run and all the events were done in the nude. You can read about the rules and stuff of all their games and how complicated it was. It was just a big worship ceremony to these athletes that would come out. And they, then each one of them would represent their gods. So that nowadays we would have people representing individual countries and running for those countries. But even at that, we're a little different these days. If Michael Phelps wins 23 gold medals over a period of time, he represents the United States. But then other people look at that and go, wow, Michael Phelps won those golds. Not just, wow, the United States won those golds. We look at famous other Olympic people through the years from other countries, and we go, oh, wow, Nadia Comaneci, wow, she was a great Olympian. We know different names. We know what country they're for, and they won them, but we know individuals. They were really running for their patron god. And if they would win, they would say, Zeus won the Olympics. Aphrodite, whoever it might be, they won. So there was a lot of that going on. So by 393, it's kind of squashed, and then within a few years, it just died out. It came back as a real place of interest in the late 1800s. Around the world, people were like, hey, we would like the idea. Historically, they looked at the Olympics and the events that went on as sporting events and said, what if we did some contests? There had been some events called Olympics prior to the late 1800s that they just kind of did that, showcase, gathered some people together and say, hey, let's race and see who's better. But they formalized, in 1892, there was this movement, and the guy, a Frenchman, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, came together with some other French people, and then they started gathering people from around the world and said, hey, what if we relaunch this and start a platform where we have competition? And so they did that. They got 79 delegates in June 1894. He proposed it. They formed the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, which still to this day exists. The first games were planned for 1896, and they said, let's go back to where the roots are. And they went to Athens, Greece. They went back to Athens, Greece to run those first Olympics. And in doing that, they had 280 participants representing 13 nations and 43 events. So there was a lot going on. Let's just get this going. I think this is really interesting. They had it all set up and had it all going. And when the event finally rolled around, they had a few people show up. They were basically just tourists and like, hey, I didn't know about this. This is pretty cool. Could I enter? And they said, sure. So they just let a few people enter at the last minute. Like, I think I could outrun them. Well, give it a shot, Becky. Let's see how that goes. Actually, at that time, it was all men. There could have been a dude named Becky, I guess. Anyway, that's a whole other deal. So they did. They had some people enter in, and out of the main events, Americans won 9 out of 12 of the main events. And in the 1896, there was the first time they actually ran the marathon. You know, marathon was not part of the original events at all. There was no marathon that was run. So the very first marathon was run in Greece, and it was won by a guy from Greece. So how fitting is that? So that's kind of how those games went. I want to show you a couple pictures of stadiums, if you would. So this first picture, go ahead and show this first one. Colton, click this next one. This is as you can see, it's one that's kind of been excavated and restored. You can actually see some of the ruins of the city around that. And they still exist around that area. This is the Panathenaic Stadium. And it is one that was excavated, and it's in Greece. And so you can kind of see through the years, there's some backgrounds that show how they excavated, how they found it. There is another one, however, go to this next slide. This is another one that they started. So when they decided to go back to Athens area, or when they started, I think this was the first Olympics. It was in the 1800s. They said, we need a stadium, so they went back and started excavating. There are earlier pictures where it's just, and this is actually a drawing enhanced picture from that time, but this is when they were cultivating out and going back through and rebuilding one of the stadiums. So the next picture is this same stadium today. They had excavated it. They've used it multiple times. This is in Greece. And this has been used for 3 Olympics. It's the only place that's ever hosted 3 Olympics. Well, so here's the thing that we have. We have this whole picture of the Olympics and competition, and there's always been a drive in humans to find out, like, who's the fastest, who's the strongest, and then we come up with all these competitions, and we want to know. And a lot of times it is for the purpose of representing something else. Nowadays in the United States, we're very individualistic, so we know who individuals are. But throughout history, a lot of times they were representing someone else even more so. And we still do that. I mean, you can't just show up at the Olympics, walk up and say, hey, I want to compete. You can't do that anymore. Especially if you don't have a representation. You have to be represented by a certain country, and you have to go through the IOC, and there are rules on how this works. In fact, it's a bureaucracy like most sports have become. There's a lot of red tape to get involved and be a part of it. But I want us to see that this is a 2,800-year-old process. Sports way predates that. But this is always something that we've done as humans. Interestingly, I was looking up, and you think about competition, all the different things that we do. I mean, from the time you're a kid, aren't there things that you did? You get together with your friends and go, all right, Let's see who can, and then you come up with some crazy competition. We're going to throw something, see who throws it the furthest. And if you realize you're not as good at throwing it, then you're going to go with accuracy. No, we're going to see who's more accurate. You just change the competition to make it work in your favor a lot of times. And we see that through the years. These are some sports that have actually made the Olympics over time that we no longer do. And there's a long list of them, but I grabbed a few of them just for interest's sake. One of them, I think, this sounds like one of those that you made up in the schoolyard when you were a kid. Or actually, you had to be at a pool, the local pool maybe. And it's called plunge for distance. And this was an Olympic event. So the plunge for distance is a swimming event. So what you do is you dive into the water, and then you can't move. You have to be perfectly still, and you float as far as you can until you surface, and they measure that. And they have a guy judging to make sure you're not cheating or fluttering your feet or anything. And that was an actual Olympic event. Let's see who can plunge and go the furthest across there. There was underwater swimming. It was an event for a while. And I remember used to do this, to like see how long you can, and there were two parts of it. There was distance and time. There was a 60-meter distance that if you made it, you just stayed underwater and then just see how long you could go. And like the first winner was like 2.5 minutes or something crazy underwater. And I thought, wow. Anyway, there's that. But you can learn to do that. Hot air ballooning got really popular at one time, and they made that an event, ballooning. That's very athletic. They did motorboating at one time. I'm thinking, okay, how does that work? And I think they figured out, well, wait a minute, the mechanical stuff, we can't really, okay, let's get rid of some of that stuff. Tug of war was was around a long time. I think you could still do that. That's kind of cool, tug of war, Anyway, this was one that I thought was interesting. Dueling pistols. I don't know how they give out silver and bronze medals for that. Sorry, no. Actually, I read they didn't shoot at each other. They would like turn and shoot targets. Like, oh, well, who cares? Roller hockey. They did roller hockey for a little bit. There's one called Lacan. It was from the French. Basically, it's MMA with canes, and they just beat each other with canes. And so, I don't know, that probably went pretty well. There was swimming obstacle course where they would swim in the water, and they had to swim under like docks, and they would have to swim over obstacles and get out and run, and then back, and it's swimming obstacles. There was a sport that I think someone from Brady would have been really good at. I think they really would be. It's called the 100-meter deer run. The 100-meter deer run. So how that worked was they had this deer, it was mechanical, but they put it out and they would shoot this thing on a rail for 100 meters. And shooters would try to hit it. They had 10 shots that they had to shoot at this thing, and they would do accuracy as it ran by. And it actually lasted for like 40 years. It was an Olympic event. And one of the guys, it's one of the oldest people that ever won a medal. A guy was 73 years old, and he won the silver medal in that. Isn't that crazy? So there's the deer run. And so anyway, his name was Oscar Swan. Who cares? He won that at 73. So the Olympics have definitely changed through the years. There's been a lot of stuff that has changed, along the way. Host countries get to introduce different events at times. That they try different things to see what would work. But the context of the first century church and what was going on at the Roman Empire and the Olympics during that time is really important for us to understand not only the mentality of the audience, but a lot of the analogous language, a lot of the, hey, the victor gets the crown and pressing on and the race, and there's a tremendous amount of reference. Particularly, it would have been driven by that. In that time, the Roman Empire, influenced by their Greek predecessors, it was huge. And they were filled with people, spectators that came for all kinds of things to look at. I mean, the gladiators were there, and And are you not entertained? You know how some of that goes. And they fight to the death. Some of them against their wishes. Some of them against lions. There was a lot going on. And by the time that John wrote Revelation, and I'll get into it in a little bit, it was strong. And it was not good for Christians during that time, because at that time, this was 200 years before Constantine comes along, and there's a lot of conversion to Christianity. There was a lot of opposition to it. They were being fed to lions, and how many of you know that's not a competition you want to be in, you know? You can fight the lions these days, and you'd hope it's in Detroit, and it's a football team, and you're okay, but that's a whole different deal. The Olympic creed, there are all kinds of creeds and mottos and sayings and about the Olympics, but one is the creed, and the creed is this: the most important thing is not to win, but to take part, just as the most important thing in life is not to triumph, but to struggle. The essential thing is not to conquer, but to have fought well. There's an integrity that has always been part of, and so the best games really are driven by an integrity, an underlying set of rules. Because if you lose those over time, it's kind of like you're playing with your brother, and it's like, okay, 2 out of 3, and you win 2 out of 3, and he says, okay, 3 out of 5, you win 3 out of 5. It's okay. The rules keep changing. Have you ever had, a family member like that? No, wait a minute. You said we were going for distance. No, we were going for accuracy. Oh, because you were more accurate. Yep. Then you get more accurate. Nope, we're going for distance. They're changing the rules. Rules are important. There are rules that are still in the Olympic Games today. 2 Timothy 2:5 says this. 2 Timothy 2:5. Similarly, anyone who competes as an athlete does not receive the victor's crown except by competing according to the rules. 2 Timothy, Paul writes to Timothy, and a whole lot of it, he uses sports analogy. He's already talking to him about what it's like to be in military, and he's like, and similarly, if you're going to compete in an athletic event, you've got to compete according to the rules, or you don't get to win. And so there are still rules these days on these competitions. And so here's some rules that actually still exist today. The boxers cannot have any facial hair in the Olympics, no facial hair. Gymnastics competitions, the ladies cannot wear colorful nail polish. There are only certain nail polishes they can wear. No longer any signs of protest. How many of you remember when the Black Panther sign was given? There have been other times they have said no protest signs. They're taking out that during the games. You can receive endorsements, and you can get money paid for that to not affect your amateur status anymore. But you cannot talk about those that have sponsored you, and in interviews and anything that you do, nor can they talk about you. Even though you can have sponsors and have a swoosh or whatever, that's all out there, because people are making money, they just don't want you to know about it. Olympic swimmers' world records are only recorded once they're sent in by fax to be recorded. That sounds like an old rule that somebody's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, it's kind of like you got to tie up your horse if you ride your horse down to the square or whatever. It's like, okay. Anyway, they got to send it by fax. That's still one. Every wrestler has to, within their suit, have a handkerchief, because if you bleed, you have to wipe up your own blood. It's like, okay, well, there you go. Water polo players have to go through a strict toenail inspection before water polo. Female beach volleyball players cannot wear a bikini that is wider than 7 centimeters on the side. You ever notice how skimpy they are? They make them wear these really, like, it can't be any wider than 7 centimeters. Karate competitors have to have clean hair. They can be disqualified if their hair is dirty. I mean, I get that. You get any closer, you're like, hey, gee, your hair does not smell terrific. It's like, you're out. Equestrian riders can never make any vocalization sound of any kind. If they ever do, and they've been disqualified on several events. There was one guy that won a medal one time, and they were going back over the audio, and they were hearing this clicking, and he was doing clicking with his mouth. He said, no, that was my saddle. And they're like, yeah, well, it just so happened every time you did that, your horse was moving. They disqualified. There are rules. There are rules that we have, and sometimes if you've ever played golf by actual rules, you know that they're crazy. Those are some crazy rules out there. When I play golf, I don't play by the rules. I make it a lot more fun that way. There's a penalty in golf if you lose your ball. You lost your ball. That was a penalty for losing it. You go back to where you were. It's one out, one back, and one out. It's a lot of penalties. My thought is you get the penalty for losing your balls. You lost your ball. You just hit another one. I mean, you paid good money for that thing. That doesn't count. Whole nother deal. Nero in 67 A.D. was a treacherous leader, but he loved the Olympics. And the Olympics rolled around, and he decided he wanted to win the Olympics. And so he did. He actually won 7 crowns in 67 A.D. because he was so good. Actually, that's not the reason he won. It's because of several reasons. He actually got crowns for a bunch of events he invented, some of which he was the only competitor. So how convenient. There was one for playing the lyre, the instrument, but he did both. He played the lyre. He won that one. For heralding, speaking, suppose, racing foal horses. He had a competition for tragedy, for Greek tragedy, and one for an unknown reason. They're not sure he got one. But the best one of all is there's a 4-horse chariot race that had been around for years. He entered in with 10 horses. He's Caesar. He gets to use 10 horses. You know what the funniest thing about it is? He actually fell out of his chariot and did not finish the race. They declared him the winner anyway. So I'm glad we don't have anyone that's still that way in society. Everyone plays by the rules. So there are different ways. In 1904, the Olympics were held. This was early on, but they were held in St. Louis, Missouri. And they had the marathon there. And it was extremely hot and extremely humid. And some say it was probably the most grueling race ever run in the Olympics. They ran through the city streets. They didn't stop the traffic. They had to run through cars. They had to go up and down hills. They had to dodge on multiple occasions wild dogs that were out running and chasing them around. So one of the American runners decided he would do it a little differently. 9 miles in, he jumped into a car that he had set up. The guy was going to drive to the finish line, but he only made it 11 more miles. The car broke down, so then he jumped out, and he finished the race. He won for a little bit until several people came and said, no, we saw a guy jump in the car and jump out. They're like, yeah, you're not going to be the winner. So they gave it to another guy instead, and the guy they gave it to actually won the race. And some of the things that they did for his diet, some of the things they did they thought would really help him win the race. He had strychnine. They used strychnine, which I guess they thought it was good for him. Raw eggs and brandy. That was his sports drink that he had. And that just sounds terrible, guys. I mean, the raw eggs, he probably watched Rocky, so he probably did that. Brandy, because a lot of people just think that's a good idea, but strychnine, I don't anyway. Sometimes I wonder about where we are now and how many things that we're doing for the right diet, because everyone's got one, that's probably not any better than strychnine, raw eggs, and brandy. That's a whole other conversation. But there are rules about how you play, and this guy, obviously, getting in a car to win a marathon is not going to be a way to go. There is a guy that was actually, his medals were taken away. In 1912, Jim Thorpe, and there's a picture, show the arena picture again. I think I've got it in there. And Jim Thorpe's in that picture. So go to that next clip. Yeah, so Jim is up in the middle top there, and so a lot of you know who Jim Thorpe was. Great athlete at the turn of the century, 1912. He was in the Olympics. He won the decathlon and the pentathlon. Decathlon, 10 events, the pentathlon, 5 events. And he swept most of the events, and he set multiple world records. After that, in 1913, they stripped him of his medals because they found out that he'd taken some money playing semi-pro baseball in the summer one time. When he pointed out that a lot of the Olympians had done that, they said, well, yeah, but they use pseudonyms, which sounds kind of like what they do now. It's like, well, we all know they did it. They just didn't talk about it. And he tried to use integrity. It wasn't until 30 years after his death that they reinstated his gold medals. There were over 1 million people that signed a petition, and the IOC unanimously said, yeah, that was dumb. He should have his medals. So they were given back. When Jim Thorpe was an athlete, he actually played professional football. He played professional baseball, and he was a barnstormer with a professional basketball team. So he was a pretty good athlete. He was the first president of the NFL, and he went on to be heralded as one of the greatest athletes that ever lived. But he didn't, during his lifetime, get to keep his gold medals. It was long after that he got those back. Rules matter. Rules can be broken wrongly, or they can be taken away wrongly, and those things can happen. But there are rules that we have in life. Sometimes fair, sometimes not fair, but that is something that happens. Integrity. I just read that as a big part of the Olympic Creed, the motto. 2 Timothy 2, 14 through 16, how we race matters. Keep reminding God's people of these things. Warn them before God against quarreling about words. It's of no value, only ruins those who listen. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, who correctly handles the word of truth. Avoid godless chatter, because those who indulge in it will become more and more ungodly. The competition that we live in, the arena of life, there are ways that we really should live. There are better ways to live that change the way that we live. There's advice in the Timothy letters that Paul gives. He uses a lot of the analogy of sports. He uses analogy of military, and he talks about having integrity. A big part of that is not quarreling or getting into vain arguments, presenting yourself as one approved by God. It is a lot about how we operate with one another. A whole lot of sports analogies, a whole lot of Olympic trials and stuff are about being in an arena of life where you're going to be put against each other. So what are we going to look like when we're in a race or in a wrestling match or in a boxing match, and all of those on multiple occasions? You know, there's big UFC fights that were on last night, and a lot of times you watch and guys will be in that arena together, and sometimes they're really good friends. They come out and they touch gloves, they fight, and one gets knocked out and the other one is there picking him up, and they're praising one another. Sometimes they don't like each other much at all. Sometimes they resort to doing crazy things like Mike Tyson biting Evander Holyfield's ear. You know, that's not good. But the reality is we are going to be in competition in life with other people. The only part of that competition we can control is our part. You know, we come at it with integrity. We come at it running the race according to what God would see. Even if the rules are set against us. You weren't going to beat Caesar in 67. I have a feeling once he fell off, someone else won. And I wonder if you were in that race, if you would have been tempted to like, oh, I better fall off my chariot too. Because the last thing I want to do is beat him. And he will know that I won this race. I'm sure they gladly did not protest because they knew their lives were on the line. So there are times then life is unfair and things happen that way. But the part you get to control is your own integrity in that. You're part of the relationships. I want to read you a long piece out of Colossians. It's a couple of screens, and it is about relationships. You've probably heard this a lot of times, but I want us to look at it again and think about what's going on in this. So go ahead and put up the Colossians passage. This is 3:17 to 25. Whatever you do, whether in word or in deed, whatever you're saying, whatever you're doing, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. now this gets into a part where a lot of times we use this and lord this over each other. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives. Do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything. This pleases the Lord. Parents, do not embitter your children. They will become discouraged. Slaves, obey your earthly masters, that even be workers in everything. Do it not only when their eye is on you, looking at you to get their favor, but with sincerity and heart and reverence to the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It's the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for the wrongs, but there is no favoritism. God's not showing favoritism. He's listing everyone. He's like, husbands, live right. Wives, live right. Parents, live right. Children, live right. Every one of them, no matter who you are, you don't get favoritism because of your position. Whether you're the worker or the one who is the boss, whether you're your husband, whether you're your wife, whether you're your parent, whether you're your child, there's a part that you have. Do whatever your part is, serving as unto the Lord. See, no matter what place you are, and he goes from one side to the other, and I believe he's doing that specifically for that reason, that you've got all these different positions. You show up in different avenues, different venues, different places in life, and it doesn't really matter what your role is. Do your role. Do your part. And you might mess up. In fact, you will mess up. But do it as unto the Lord. Do your best in word. Do your best in deed. What you say, how you act. Doesn't mean you're going to be better at doing it, but you're going to do it with your heart, and you're going to be doing it as unto the Lord. The beauty of that is that you bless other people in the midst of that. Relationships are a big, big part of what he's driving at, what's being driven out in the Colossians letter to Timothy. You've got a part. Sean and I do this a lot. We were working with a couple. If I'm ever working with them and I'm like, a husband and a wife, well, he says this and she says that, and he does this wrong and she does that wrong. That's all true, and my emotions make me feel this way. Well, my emotions feel this way. Well, you shouldn't feel that way, which is a crazy thing to say, because even if you know that's not the right way to feel, sometimes you feel that way. Even if you can think through it and go, I know I shouldn't feel that way, but I do. Emotions are true. That is a real emotion, whether you should feel that way or not. It's still a genuine emotion. But what do I do with that? Whatever my part is in that relationship, I give it to the Lord. Because my greatest drive, my greatest ambition, my greatest thing in life is to please the Lord. Oh, that doesn't mean I'm always good at it, but that's what I always have to come back around to. I don't like this. I think it's terrible. And what is that about? Well, ultimately, I'm probably mad at God in that situation, whatever bad might happen. I did something bad or something bad happened to me. It's the same thing that happens from the garden from the very beginning. It's the accuser, Satan, the great adversary telling you it's God's fault. He does it all the time. And he's trying to get you focused on that. So you're in this competition of life, and you're in it. Sometimes it's mothers against fathers and children against each other, and we have a lot of scripture about those relationships. But how do you handle them when bad things occur? Well, there's one part, and there's one part only that you can do, and that's your part. So then that onus comes back on me. So what can I do as unto the Lord? That's the core of all of this. I want to shift gears a minute, and I want to show you guys something. So, the Olympic shambles, or opening ceremonies that I guess they just had in Paris, there have always been these opening ceremonies. The Olympics have always been about great ceremony, pomp, and woohoo, and riding in on horses, and team colors, and yay, and every one of these early ones especially, it would be like, Zeus, or their mascots weren't lions and tigers and bears, oh my, but they were instead these Greek gods. And they would cry out for their gods, with their patron gods of their particular cities as they fought together, city-state against city-state. And this was one of the things that they did over hundreds of years, and very much what would have been ingrained in society by the time John comes around in the late first century, at the time when just Christianity is being persecuted. There are all kinds of factions, and people are trying to figure out, what does this new way of life look like? And John is at one point thrown, they try to kill him, but they can't kill him. You know, the history tells us that they'd boil him in oil and it didn't kill him. And they thought, well, this guy's probably going to live forever. So they put him on an island of Patmos. He's in prison there, and he gets a revelation from God. And we have that as our last book in the Bible. It's called Revelation, because it's the revelation of John. By the way, it's just one. It's not revelations, it's revelation. It's one revelation to John, and he records it. It is fraught with, the whole outline of the book of John just goes almost line by line about the Olympic Games. I'm going to read to you what happens at the Olympic Games, and then we're going to look at Revelation. So let me read the first part. First, there's a presentation of the Emperor Caesar enters, acclaimed by those gathered in the stands. So everyone comes in, there's Caesar, yay, he's presented. There's a herald announcement. The emperor was almost always induced by a recitation of his mighty deeds and accomplishments. Here's what all he's done. Caesar's pronouncement. Caesar would take the opportunity to speak to the cities and regions where they were represented. The pronouncement often was typically, I've heard this about you, but I am going to, and this is good stuff, but I'm going to warn you about these things. There's a chorus singing imperial praise. The crowd is dressed in white and robes. This is the accepted attire. There were 24 priests from the 24 recognized religions in Rome at that time. The games were open. The herald would read a scroll extolling the greatness of the gods and Caesar and the king. They call him King of Kings a lot of times. Very common for the Caesars. They would call him God Most High. They ushered the beginning of the competition. And it started with the chariot race. And the chariot races were each colored. And there were 4 colored horses that would come in. And there would be chariot teams of black horses and red horses. And teams that were white horses. And teams that were pale and spotted horses. And each of them would come in. And then the trumpet would blast and the games would begin. And this part that's up here right now is a walkthrough from what happens in Revelation. Revelation 1, the emperor is presented, God is presented as the Alpha and the Omega. The herald announcement, John hears a voice telling him to write down what he sees, the greatness of God. Caesar's pronouncement, 7 letters to the 7 churches are given. This, you've done really well. This is what I have against you. The same format used at the pronouncement in the games. Chorus sings the imperial praises. 24 elders in white, which is the same thing that would have been done by the pronouncement in the games. Games open. The slain lambs found worthy to open the scrolls, because they say, who can open it? And it would be opened by the Caesar at the time, the ruler. But in this case, there was only one. The chariot races come out, the 4 horses of the apocalypse are described, and then a trumpet blast in Revelation 8, and it goes right down the line in order. Revelation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right down the line. This was nothing that was trying to really be hidden by John. This was something obvious that if you used football analogies or baseball analogies or anything like that today, people would understand what you're talking about. This is a picture. He got this revelation from God directly, and he had a great message, but it's wrapped in this texture so that we could better understand what was going on in that time. And they would go, I get it, I get it. A big part of that is people might look at that and go, he's telling them we're in this arena of life, and that's a big part of it. But it goes deeper than that with John. Because John knows this about those games and about where we are also. And that everybody that enters into that competition goes in as a representation of their God. Who are you fighting for? when you enter into this arena. And a big part of Revelation is, what are you committed to? Under what banner are you flying? And what does it mean to you? And this is a big part of what is going on in the book of Revelation. John knows this. The people reading it would have known that. There would have been clarity of a lot of that. And there's so much rich information in the book of Revelation. But it wasn't just about the future and the end times. How many of you know this? Prophetic words, apocalyptic literature spans over time, so much of the time. It meant something for them then. They were actually being physically murdered at the hands of Roman authorities. They were thrown into the arenas to fight animals or each other to the death. This was not, when we talk about persecution now, we're like, well, they talked bad about me. Well, I'm pretty sure they did. They were across the room. They looked back my way. I mean, the things that we do now, or even you get in a fist fight with someone, whatever, the tough stuff that we have compared to what was going on at this time. The one who wrote it, who had been boiled in oil and set to an island to get this word from God. I've not gone there. I don't understand that level of persecution and endurance and representing God that way. But we do have an arena we are now in life. Let me read Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. Hebrews 12, 1 through 3 gives us some more. This is, again, got a lot of sports figure in this, but let's read it. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us, the sin that so easily entangles us. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer, the perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorned the shame, sat down on the right hand of God, the throne room of God, and consider him who endured such opposition for sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. What an amazing picture. He gives this idea of a race and says there is one that you've seen run this thing. And run it as he did. And by the way, for him. Because you can't and you're not good at it in and of yourself, but Jesus is that one. Endurance is a big, big part of a lot of what's going on. There's also this pronouncement in the beginning of that. There's a great cloud of witnesses. And this happens in a lot of the books. Timothy talks about there are people watching. Revelation, the witnesses are there. There are people. There is this whole idea of the arena and sports is so that everyone's watching to see how do you run with integrity? Do you run your best? Are you enduring? How are you with obstacles? And a lot of times it's not to see who the actual winner is, but how well you run the race, and people pay attention to that. That first part in Hebrews 12:1, if we look at that once again, just that first part, it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us, the sin that so easily entangles us. I've talked before about this picture of what sin is in both the Greek and the Hebrew. Sin is actually an archery term of missing the target. Remember talking about that before? If you haven't been here, that's what it is. In both languages, it's an actual literal archery term when you aim and you miss the target. But there are multiple reasons why we might miss the target. One of those is that we're impaired one way or another. Maybe we're terrible because we've never practiced. And it's foreign to you because it's not something you do regularly. So you're not trained for it. So you train for it. Another is that the target might move. There's something wrong with the target. The rules change. Caesar gets in the way. There could be external circumstances that make you miss the target. Or probably the most common one is, we're all well trained at shooting, one way or another. We're all aiming for something. Well, we're all shooting at a target, but a lot of times we're just shooting at the wrong target. You know, there's an old funny story about the kid who's got a fence up, and every one of his arrows are in the middle of the target, and the guy comes along and says, "Man, you're really good at this, shooting every target." He says, "How'd you get so good?" He says, "Well, it's easy." And he just shoots an arrow into the fence, and he goes and he draws a target around the arrow. I'm really good at that. So sometimes that's what we do, but the Word of God says that sin is when we're missing those targets over and over. And so what are those things that easily entangle you? Now, some of the stuff that we do. And there are a couple of different ways, really at the base of it, that get us off target. And it's either something's happening to me or something that I'm doing. If it's something that's happening to me, I have to endure it, and I only do my part. But I've got to examine what I'm doing. Maybe there is something I'm doing. Maybe there is something that I can take care of. And so we look at both of those. God's grace is enough for either one. There's bad stuff that's going to happen to you. There's no way around it in the world that we live in. That is going to happen. And your targets will not get hit sometime. You could be in a situation where you're in a rocking ship and everything's moving. Maybe that 100-meter deer is running too fast, or it got stuck when you were shooting, whatever. We miss targets. It could be extenuating circumstances. There are also times that we just don't do well. We just kind of give up in the middle of it, and we're like, I don't know. It was tough. I don't think I'm going to endure this anymore. And God has grace for both of those. He knows that sometimes things are really tough on us. He knows these situations. But we have one that gave us an example of how to live in that. We have this part that it says about Jesus. In that second part of that, Hebrews 12:1-3, if you go down, let us run with perseverance the race marked before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of the faith. Some of them say the originator and the finisher. That would work as well. He's the one that went ahead, that did it first and pioneered it, and he is the one that completes it, the one who completes it. Word of God tells us, he who began a good work in us will be faithful to complete it. When Jesus died on the cross, what did he say? He said, Tetelestai, it is finished. That work is completed. Here's the best news about the arena and the race that you're now racing in. There is one who's gone before you, already completed the race, and now you're just running it by the grace of the Lord. He has already finished the race. He's already fought the fight. He's already completed the end of the task of the goal that you're now going towards. He's hit every target because he's sinless. And when we remain sinful, we simply give ourselves to him because he remains sinless. Things happen and we don't hit the target because stuff happened to us. Yes, he knows that. Bad things happen to good people. Everyone goes through life on a rocking boat, and targets are moving, and some people get it a lot worse than others, but it's the same Jesus and his grace that takes us through our endurance for every one of those. If we think about the ultimate marathon or endurance event, and the marathon comes to mind for most of us as an Olympic event. We talked a little bit about it already. The marathon started out as a commemoration for the famous runner that ran in Greece, and he ran Pheidippides, I think. It's either pronounced that way or a different way, but that's how I'm going to say it. A Greek soldier ran from Marathon to Athens to tell them that they had won. In 490 BC, he proclaimed Greek victory over the Persians. And we know that he got there and he collapsed and died after he told them. They've gone back and measured it historically. They think it was about 24.8 miles, 24.85 miles. If you've ever run a marathon, you're probably thinking right now, that would have been a little better. Because later on they made it 25 miles, and then they made it 26 miles, and now It rests at 26.2 miles. I don't know who in here has maybe run a marathon. Charlie's run several half marathons. I've run my mouth off a few times, but no, that's no. I trained for marathons several times. I never actually completed one. That's a whole different story. But there's a great marathon runner, one of the most famous one that ever ran. He ran in 1968. Now I remember it well because I was several months old at the time, and he ran in the 1968 Olympics. And you can go back and you can watch this runner. He's one of the most well-known runners because his name is John Stephen Aquari. John Stephen Aquari. He's famous not because he won. In fact, he may be the most famous loser of all times. I've got a picture John will put up in a minute, but I want to tell you a little bit about his story. So John Aquari had been running in the 60s and ran even into the early 70s for a while. He was a marathon distance runner. The Mexico City event was where he ran. He got about 10 miles in. There were a lot of runners. There were 75 that began the race. They got in, a peloton, a big group that were all together, hitting each other, and they're running pretty fast. I don't know if you ever looked at split times on marathons, but you could take any single mile out of that marathon, and it would win a high school single mile event. They are flying, which blows my mind. They're running fast. They're 10 miles in, and John gets in this peloton, this crush of humanity, and they're bumping around, and he goes down. He hit so hard, he just scraped up his shoulder really badly. He dislocated his knee, and he's bleeding out of his knee. The medical team comes, and they bandage him up just crudely, honestly, and they're like, okay, you're not going to win. You might as well get. He said, nope. So he jumps up and takes off running again. He finishes more than an hour past the first place runner. He enters into the Olympic arena at the end of that run, and the large majority of the stadium is already emptied out. There's some that know he's still running, so they're kind of waiting around, and some people snap pictures of him and stuff, and this is a picture of John. This is him. So he's running for his country, and so he finally finishes the race, limping, at times trying to run, and after he stopped running, the guys come up to him, and they're asking him, it's like, why did you not stop? He said, my country did not send me 5,000 miles to start the race. They sent me 5,000 miles to finish the race. And it became what some people call the most famous last place finishers in Olympic history because of that mentality. And here's the thing about where we are in our world today. You've been sent here to run this race. You've been given a set of tools, and maybe you feel like, man, I don't know that I can endure. I'm certainly not going to win this race. But that outcome has already been determined. There's one that pioneered it. He is the pioneer and the finisher of our faith. He who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. No matter what you've come through, he'll take you where you're going. It's appointed unto everyone that we should die, that is, finish the race, and then there is a judgment, which is at a point which then the victor's crowns are given out. And it's at that point that those crowns are given not based on whether you did so well or not, but whether you gave yourself over to the one who runs the race. You put your faith in the one who pioneered and finished. See, because you're not going to outrun this world. You're going to fall down. Stuff's going to happen to you. You're going to mess things up. You'll miss a target because the target moves. You'll miss it because you're shooting wrong. You'll miss it because you're not good at it. That happens. You'll fall down and you won't want to get up, but you continue because it's a done deal. And when you get to that place, that reward, that ultimate finish line, the victor's crown is given because of the one who's already won the competition. And that is the God you're running for. You've entered into the arena of life under a banner, under a flag, representing a God. Every one of us is. We're flying our colors. What are you worshiping? When people look at you in the arena of life and you're running, what are you running under? What are the colors you're flying? What are you in this for? And that is what this competition is all about. It's where John was going. It's where we are now, and it's the thing that we do. If we're going to live this life, let's live it in such a way to represent the one who sent us here. Because we're all sent with a purpose, and we're all going to run this race, and we'll all finish it. Every one of us. When he talks about running it well, it's running it well with a heart towards the one that you have faith in. Not because you're the individual that does so well, but because you run under the banner of the one true God. And that race has already been won. Amen? Amen. Amen.